Welcome to this episode of Who Gets the China, where we are saving our sanity while supporting our aging parents. And today I'm really excited to be talking about a topic that I have had a lot of reader questions about, which is financial planning, and in particular, financial planning for women. So we have a very special guest with us today. My guest is Cheri Turner. She is a certified financial planner professional and financial advisor with Client First Capital in San Diego. And she specializes in helping couples and single women build financial confidence and clarity. Particularly, she helps women navigating retirement, widowhood, divorce, or other major life transitions. And so I'm really excited to have her bring her expertise to us today. Thank you and welcome.
Wow, thank you so much, Kirsten. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm excited to be here.
Cheri and I want to mention that we are not offering specific financial or investment advice. This discussion is for educational and informational purposes only, and please reach out to your own financial planner or, of course, to Cheri, and I will provide her information in the show notes if you would like to do so. So, Cheri, talk to me for a minute about how you came to be a financial planner that has a specific interest in helping women.
For me, my path to becoming a financial planner was actually a deeply personal one. It was actually during my own divorce, which was undoubtedly one of the toughest periods in my life. And I had worked with a financial advisor of my own. And she basically helped me to view money completely differently, not as something to be intimidated by, but really as a tool for independence and my own stability. So we went through the process of creating a financial plan for me. And what I found was that it just gave me so much confidence and peace of mind to kind of have that understanding and path forward. So at a time when everything was so unpredictable, having that clarity really felt like it took an enormous weight off of my shoulders. So gaining that confidence was truly life-changing, and it inspired me to want to bring others that same sense of empowerment and peace of mind. My ex-husband and I had run a business together, so it didn't make sense for me to continue to do that. So really, I knew that already it was time for me to pivot and do something else. So at the recommendation of my financial advisor, I went back to school and earned my CFP designation.
Congratulations. That's no easy
Thank
feat.
you.
I know it.
Yeah, yeah, especially at the age I did it.
We're
It's
never too old, right?
Yes, that's right. So while I work with many amazing couples, there's just something so rewarding to me about helping single women find that same clarity and confidence, whether they're single by choice or whether they are navigating their own divorce or even widowhood. Just seeing that transformation in
Yeah,
others is what makes it so
I
meaningful.
love that. We will talk about, women who are part of couples too, because I think that's also really important and maybe in some ways tougher because you're not your own sole actor. You're also having to navigate your finances with a partner, which,
Yes,
as many of us who are married know, that that's not always easy. So,
right. That and sharing responsibilities also means that you're not always aware of everything. So
right, right. Oh, 100%. I definitely want to get into that. What are some of the unique opportunities and challenges that women face in terms of retirement saving and planning that might be different from men?
that's a great question because women's retirement planning really does look different, not just because of different income history, but because of longevity, priorities, and then how women really approach decisions around money. One of the biggest challenges is longevity. Women tend to live anywhere from 5 to 7 years longer than men on average. So their retirement savings, especially, have to stretch much farther.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we're planning for more than 35 years of potential, retirement savings, depending on what age they decide to retire at. It's also critical to consider the rising cost of healthcare and long-term care because while they were often partial caregivers to their spouses towards the end, they're typically the survivors. So there's nobody remaining that helps them out with those expenses at the end. There are also tremendous opportunities, though. Women are very relationship driven and values based. So I tend to find that they don't seek to accumulate money simply for the sake of wealth,
Mm-hmm.
but for what it provides to them, that
Mm-hmm.
it provides them freedom to make choices, the security to weather their transitions, and independence to kind of live life on their own terms. So I find that women often approach money more holistically,
Hmm.
and their investments to reflect their values and their life goals, and oftentimes, more social or charitable values.
Yeah.
And defining what is enough is different for everybody, right? It
Yeah.
does depend on where those values are.
We were talking a little bit about, let's call it boomer women, right? Like I'm thinking about my parents in particular. My
Right.
dad was the breadwinner. My mom took care of us. She worked part-time and she had a job before they got married. They met at Domino Sugar in New York City. They had, corporate jobs in New York, but then my dad went on, kept living his career life, and my mom started living more of a mom homemaker life and did work somewhat, but he earned the vast majority of their finances. And he by default like pays the taxes, pays a lot of the bills, not that
Mhm.
there was maybe ever conversations about that, but that's just how it defaulted. But I see now my mom doesn't have the facility with their finances.
Mhm.
She'll say like, "Well, I don't know how we pay this bill. I don't know, can we afford X, Y, or Z?" She has a lot of questions. And also, you're entrenched in your marital roles by this time. You've been married 60 years. It's a little hard to all of a sudden be saying, "Hey, wait a minute, I have questions. Why is this money invested this way?" What's your experience about that dynamic and how you might help women advocate for themselves or think about what questions they should be asking to educate themselves and feel like empowered?
Start simple, maybe start looking into things like the day-to-day finances. Look at, you know, budgeting and, where your income and expenses are, because a lot of times, even in these households, women have had some exposure to at least that, right? Because they're
Yeah.
running the household and, doing the grocery shopping and that kind of thing. If they have a financial advisor, I think a great place to begin, which I always encourage of all of my clients, is go to the meetings with them. And in that kind of situation, that's where you can kind of more safely ask questions, because most financial advisors that I'm familiar with, they want both spouses to be, kind of up to speed. They want to
Hmm.
understand, partly to prevent that element of surprise. If one spouse passes and the one that's remaining is the one that doesn't know anything, there's tremendous overwhelm combined with the fact that you just lost the love of your life and you're, entrenched in
Right.
grief. And
Right.
so it's very, very overwhelming. Depending on how your spouse takes it, just kind of, take a look at your income versus your expenses. Ask to see what the different accounts are. And, you can always approach it as, hey, just in case anything should happen to you,
Hmm.
I want to be aware. Oftentimes, a good time to approach this is when, like, going on vacation or something, right? Hey, just in case anything should happen to either one of us, I would like to be prepared.
Mm.
If she's able, make a list of the various accounts. Make lists of what are all of your bank accounts, what are all of your brokerage and retirement accounts, what are your different insurance policies, who are they through, where are those, where are those accounts, which bank are you using, where are the investment accounts? And, if you have a spouse who has been managing it, depending on how receptive they are, I think if you kind of, like I said, start small and get into little bits and pieces, but then, even building up to what is a complete list of our assets? Like, what do we even have? Sometimes, I've seen clients who they have real estate in different states and
Hmm.
weren't even aware.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So, kind of again, approaching it from a perspective of, hey, I just want to be prepared just in case. I think that leaves most spouses a bit more receptive to having the conversation, or at least opening up the books.
And do
If
you experience this frequently? Like, do you have clients where there are women, older women that really don't have much information or knowledge or
I
Mhm.
think it used to be less common, at least in our firm. We really try to request that both spouses
Mhm.
come to all meetings. Unless somebody's ill or something like that, we really like to see them both there. And with us, we have various meetings throughout the year. So we'll have one meeting where we talk about, how did your investments do last year? Well, we'll discuss all of each of your different accounts. And so
Mhm.
the woman would become aware, oh, we have this IRA, or we have this brokerage account, and we have these different type accounts. There's a Roth IRA or whatever. And then we have a meeting once a year where we do your full financial plan. Another great thing about that is we review your previous plan, and then we adjust any changes. Did you
Mhm.
have any new grandchildren? Did you, any changes in your family? Were there any inheritances or extreme expenses that happened in the last year that we need to account for in your plan? And so those type things, again, would help her to become more aware
Mm-hmm.
what everything is because you're addressing anything that changed. And then in the fall, we always do an estate planning meeting. So we'll kind of review the trust. Well, if she's not aware of what's in the trust, then she's really in the dark. So
Mm-hmm.
having those conversations around the trust would help to bring her up to speed. We talk about having a financial and a medical power of attorney. Well, not just the husband needs that, but the wife needs to have
Right.
it as well. And so if they're not part of the conversation, it may very well be that only one spouse has those really needed documents even completed.
Well, first of all, during COVID, that was an opportunity for our family to say, let's make sure we have all the medical power of attorney documentation all
Yeah.
locked up. And, my parents have done really great planning all along, but just recently they ended up switching from one financial advisor to another one. I think maybe we talked about this a little bit. And so like that was really like an open the books kind of situation from a logistical standpoint. Was kind of a pain in the neck, but it
Yeah.
was good because not only my mom felt, I think, more confident that she knew all the working parts, but also my sister and I also feel
Right.
like we know, okay,
Yeah.
here's what we're fully dealing with. And I think my parents have been probably more open than many based on some of my conversations with friends. One of the things I notice you guys talk about is this multi-generational planning. I guess I'm also asking you for advice, like as the daughter of older parents. Um, what are the things that I should maybe be looking out for that I might not think to ask?
We talked about some of those
Yep.
power of attorneys, having a different types of powers of attorney that can apply, whether you have a medical power of attorney, durable power of attorney, but to ensure, if one person, or especially when it comes to the children, if anything should happen to both parents together, they go on a trip, they go on a flight. Sometimes things happen to the two
Hmm.
of them at the same time. Somebody needs to have not only the knowledge but the authority to be able to act on their behalf, whether it's contributing to those medical decisions, so being aware both of what do they want and then having that authority to be able to speak for them, and then even financially being able to make sure their bills get paid until they're well and things like that.
Hmm.
Now different parents have different levels of willingness to
Yep.
be open about certain things. We With our clients who are willing, we try to involve the adult children relatively early on. A lot of times they'll have charitable desires and things like that. And so
Hmm.
having those values discussions early on and really ensuring not only that your children are aware of what's important to you when it comes to their legacy, but also that they share those values. The
Hmm.
more that you bring them in, the more that you have conversations and explain why things are so important to you, the more likely that they're going to carry those values on and then act them out.
Yeah, like I say to my dad, we just want to know what you want so we
Exactly.
can deliver what you want. If we
Right.
don't know what your wishes are, we can't execute them.
Yes.
And I've also had friends and colleagues share experiences where maybe there were some significant charitable contribution
Mhm.
plans, but maybe the kids didn't know about that.
Yes.
And then they were caught off guard. I
Mhm.
mean, my husband likes to tell, this is a long ago story, but he likes to tell the story of when his grandmother passed. She just donated all her money to the church.
Mhm.
And nobody had seen that coming. As a kid or as a parent, what's your advice for preventing that kind of surprise?
For instance, like in your example of just saying, I just want to ensure that I honor your wishes, even asking directly,
Hmm.
hey, are there charitable places or causes that are important to you that you want to be able to give to? A lot of people will specify that out in their will, or you could ask more directly, is there anything that I should be aware of? Things that you would like me to continue to honor after you, and kind of leading some somewhat leading questions to where
Mm.
if they have already designated some to that, it's sort of offers them the opportunity to open up that conversation and to say, well, yeah, it is our intention to leave some to the church, or to care for the animals or to the zoo or whatever,
Right.
then it allows them kind of that opportunity. Because to your point, yeah, unfortunately, the time that's the most difficult is when it comes as a complete surprise.
Mm-hmm.
Had in that situation, had somebody had the conversation, it might have been hard to hear at first, but they would have sort of dealt with it and made their peace with it, I'm sure, by the time she had passed. We had a similar situation with my mom where my grandmother had passed and they had 6 children. Well, the seventh child was the church. And so, they all didn't know that, but yes, the church got its equal share of stuff. Nobody knew that was coming either.
Right. And I mean,
It happens.
you might be fine. I mean, it's not to say that you're not okay with it, but I think
Right.
it's, again, it's that it's a nice thing to do, to communicate and to plan.
To that point, I know our conversation is more about how to approach your parents, but, it becomes even more important when it comes to your own wishes, when you're creating your own will or trust. Share these things with your family, share these things, especially with your children,
Mm-hmm.
and let them know it's coming. Let them know why it's important to you. Because again, the more that you share that, the more likely that you may instill those same values in your own children, and perhaps have that legacy even carry on. But if
Mm-hmm.
nothing else, it prevents that element of surprise, because so many times relationships can be destroyed when things come out in a way that people weren't expecting. And, especially if it's a situation where somebody got blamed because of something else, maybe someone's executor, maybe they knew and nobody else,
Mm-hmm.
finger pointing can happen and things like that. So when it comes to creating your own will and or trust, share those facts, as much as possible with the kids, and why you did what you did, so that there isn't that, the hurt feelings afterwards.
Right. Thinking about women in particular, I'm sure there must be lots of women who might find themselves in a position where their spouse died and maybe, they don't have the money that they thought to continue living that same type of life. What are some of the things that as women we should be doing to protect our own financial security as we age?
Make sure that you are looking at things. So many times people, especially if they have this sense that like, oh, I'm not where I should be, or I'm not really prepared, sometimes they'll kind of avoid it. And that's the worst thing that you can do.
Mm-hmm.
Really just opening up the picture and kind of getting a start. Um, well, part of what we discussed earlier, as far as, even women in relationships, look at your income, look at your expenses, kind of look where those net out. How are you doing? Do you need to cut back on some of those expenses? And then again, looking at all of your assets, your investments, being aware of how are you invested, especially, we talk about different ages. How close are you to retirement? The level of risk that you want to take within a
Mm-hmm.
portfolio, is very dependent on what stage in life you're at. And, being appropriate around that level of risk, so that you don't risk assets very close to retirement. By sitting down and really creating a plan, I talked about kind of the peace of mind that it gave to me. But the nice thing is, when you come back and review that plan every year, because the truth is that a plan is a snapshot of today.
Mm-hmm.
And tomorrow something could change, right? For the better or for the worse. You might have an inheritance, or, something horrible may have happened. But being aware and having that awareness and actively working on your plan means that from year to year, or whenever an event occurs, you come back and you revise that plan and you say, okay, this element changed and here's what it did to my plan. So what things can we pivot on?
Mm-hmm.
What can I change to help get back on track? Or, it might mean working a little longer, or it might mean retiring a little later, but at least you're aware, right? And you're making those conscious choices. Getting that going, I think, really gives you more of a sense of control and
Mm-hmm.
just awareness, because I find for some women, especially when you're talking to single women, sometimes they're far better off than they thought they were. They've been
Uh-huh.
living in this state of fear, right? Like, oh my gosh, it's just me. I don't have that much, da, da, da. But when you lay it all out in a plan and you look at, okay, what are going to be your sources of income in retirement? And, how much do you have in your retirement accounts to contribute to that? And oftentimes it actually brings them more confidence because they realize they were better off than they thought they were.
Taking that another step further, why do you think that women avoid topics around money? I know you're not a psychologist, but I mean, I know you deal with, but I'm just, you must see it all the time. And like you just, what you said was, it just struck a chord because you were
Yeah.
like, look at it, don't avoid it. And I think
Yes.
you're right. Women avoid it.
Yes.
Why do we
Well,
do
to
that?
be fair, it's not just women,
Okay.
but we do definitely have that tendency. I think part of it is women tend to be a little more intimidated around money than men in general. There's kind of a sense of, if I don't know, it can't hurt me. But you're
Mm,
also really relinquishing your control by not looking directly at it. One of the things to me, I always think of financial health as what I call the third pillar of wellness,
hmm
in that we talk about our mental health and our physical health, and we don't focus as much on our financial health. But really, if you look at the studies, worries about money cause high blood pressure, insomnia, stress, all of these different conditions, and it truly impacts both our mental and our physical health. So, in reality, by avoiding it, we're putting all components of our health at risk. And by having that plan in place, it helps to create much more that sense of confidence and peace, which then supports both of your mental and physical health.
I've never heard that before, but I love this idea of like you've got the three-pronged stool of your overall health, right? You've got your physical, your mental, and your financial. When it's not settled, you feel anxiety, and anxiety is not good for your long-term well-being.
And a lot of times, too, the things that create tremendous stress today, if you look at it in relation to your overall financial plan, might not be such a big deal. If you never stop and take that step and take that look, all you do is carry that stress throughout the entire
Right.
process. But
Right.
when you take whatever number it is and plug it back in, A, you've taken control, right? Because you are looking squarely directly at it, you're managing it, dealing with it. But again, oftentimes it's not near as impactful as the fear that you've placed behind it.
I hear what you're saying, that if you view it as one of the three prongs of your overall health and outlook, taking control of it, just like we try to do with our physical health, our emotional health, like you're going to empower yourself to feel better.
Right.
I wanted to just ask you for a minute, like a nuts and bolts question about Social Security benefits.
Okay.
I would love to just have you explain from the wife's point of view, because many wives may not have as much money in their own Social Security account. I'm
Right.
making a gigantic assumption there,
Right.
but tell me if that's even true. And then, yeah, as from the wife's point of view, what do I need to know? What should I be asking? What are some things I should be thinking about with
Mhm.
regard to Social Security?
So, to your point, I think it is still fair to say that most women, or spouses, have a lower Social Security than their husband. I think over time we will see that trend begin to shift, and that certainly doesn't hold true in all households.
hmm
But the thing to keep in mind is that, while you're both alive, if the spouse has not had near as much work experience, because obviously, as we said, a lot of times they've been, taking care of the kids, the households, and supporting their spouses and their spouses' careers. If a spouse should pass, if you're a married couple and your spouse passes, then you keep the higher of the two.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Unfortunately, you do only get to keep one, so you do lose one, so your income does decline. The really tricky and unfortunate part about this, with especially with married couples, is that you'll get to keep that higher Social Security amount, but the year after your spouse passes, you suddenly become single, right?
hmm
So you then fall into the single tax brackets. So, not only do you now have lower income, but oftentimes your tax bill, your tax obligation is actually higher just because
Mm.
of the change in the tax bracket. That's actually something they call the widow's penalty.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, part of the reason why we encourage people to move their funds into Roth accounts as much as possible, because your Roth accounts, when you take the money out of there, it's non-taxable.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat back what I think I've heard you say because you
Okay.
just gave so much great information. I want to make sure I'm tracking with it. My husband and I, when he retires, he gets his full Social Security benefit depending on whatever age he decides to take it at. I retire 5 years later. I get my full Social Security benefit. He keeps his
Yes.
Social Security benefit. Okay. Then, if he were to pass first, I would, depending on our situation, of course, but in my case, mine is less, I would forfeit my Social Security and I would take his.
Yes.
Okay. But when does the widow's penalty come into play?
So in the year that your spouse passes,
Uh-huh.
you are able to still file married filing jointly,
Okay.
regardless of when in that year your spouse passed. However, the following year, you are now going to have to file as single.
Okay.
So obviously your tax brackets are much reduced, and typically you end up paying a considerably higher amount in taxes.
So the other thing that we've been talking about, and I know you're not giving specific financial advice, but if it's possible for your to delay your spouse taking Social Security until they are older, their benefit would be greater. So as the wife, that's advantageous to me because I could possibly be taking his Social Security benefit for longer because I'm going
Right.
to live longer and
Mhm.
at the higher rate.
Yes.
So that's something everybody needs to discuss, but am I saying that accurate?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Where possible, unless you absolutely need that income, it's typically beneficial to postpone until 70. 70 is the age at which it pretty much maxes out. So it no
Okay.
longer continue to get higher. So if you delay until 70, that payment will continue both through the rest of his life, as well as if he predeceases you, you then receive his, then you continue to receive that for the rest of your life.
So when we're talking about deciding when to take our Social Security benefits, I think that's a time when women also need to be well educated so
Yes.
that they can have that conversation with their spouse. Like maybe their
Right.
spouse is like, no, I want to quit my job and take my benefits at 66 or whatever. And
Yes.
maybe that's a fine choice for them. But if the wife is not knowledgeable about the rules around Social Security, you could possibly be at a disadvantage over time.
Right.
Can you talk about when we should start having these financial planning conversations with our parents and, what are some other times that there might be opportunities to bring it up?
Because it can often be a difficult and awkward subject to bring up, there are a few times that would be relatable, such as, when they're leading into retirement, or also when they're downsizing. A lot of times the retired people get to a point where, oh, we don't want to take care of this yard and everything anymore.
Hmm.
They're going to move into a condo and they're having to get rid of a bunch of stuff. That's oftentimes a good time to start having those conversations, especially because, oftentimes you're engaged and with them and clearing certain things out. And so it's a great time to talk about, values and memories and those kinds of things. And then also if they're either creating or revising a trust, those are really great times to start introducing some of those conversations.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense because it can be hard to bring up, right? For us, once the sort of dam broke and we started having these conversations, it
Mhm.
became more natural to bring it up over time when things changed or like once you started talking about it, you released whatever anxiety or taboo there was around it, and then it becomes much easier to bring up again. So, are there any kind of worst case stories or scenarios that we should be mindful of? I mean, not to scare people, but just
Yeah.
do things come to mind that are like real watch outs?
Honestly, there are a few. One I would say is when somebody passes away and there's no trust and not even a will. In those situations, everything goes into probate. And basically, state law is now going to decide who inherits whatever you have, and you have no say, right? Not only that, but it typically will lead to long delays, potential conflicts, and outcomes that do not reflect what your specific wishes were.
Hmm.
In addition to that, it's very expensive. Oftentimes it takes years, and the courts charge you for that time, right? So it's also going to dwindle down the assets, whatever assets were in that estate. And I've seen people spend months or even years going through probate. Um, and sadly, I've seen families divided about
Hmm.
these kinds of issues. The second that I would think of, and we have discussed this a little bit, but it's where one partner is not aware of what's going on in that financial picture, right? And especially when that person passes, that sense of, not only does that responsibility now fall to them, they have no idea what accounts there are, if there's even life insurance, right?
Hmm.
A lot of times they don't know that. They oftentimes don't know how to access certain things. I've even heard of situations where a spouse had a safe and the wife didn't even know the combination to the safe. So, it was like they had to have a locksmith come out to even access the records. And yeah, so again, really, as difficult as the conversation can be, especially for perhaps these older couples where, the husband may have been managing it for the majority of the time,
Hmm.
um, it's so, so important to approach those conversations and just to really, again, to come from a place of, hey, just in case anything happens, I want to be aware. And again, I would definitely encourage people to be involved with a financial advisor, because if nothing else, it gives you that opportunity to be engaged in those meetings. You can't help but learn a lot just by nature of attending the meetings. Even if
Hmm.
you don't, even if you sit there and don't say anything, just take it all in, right? Sit like a sponge and take it all in. In addition, when you have a financial advisor and one spouse passes away, any good advisor is going to really guide you through that process. And that will make a huge difference
Hmm.
in that situation. The other thing that I can think of that a lot of times gets missed is really planning for long-term care. I
Yeah.
think a lot of people just think they're going to have Medicare in retirement and everything's good. Well, Medicare does not cover long-term care, and long-term care is extremely expensive nowadays. And, I've seen families who drain significant savings, if not a lot of almost all of their savings on the first spouse needing long-term care. So again, it comes back to that, as hard as it is to sit down and make a plan and as scary as it can be, at least having a plan, knowing a path, whether it's, well, we might have to sell the house or we might have to get a reverse mortgage or something else.
Hmm.
Sometimes the plan even comes down to, well, you might be able to stay in the house for this long, and then the surviving spouse may have to move in with children. Um, but again, having that plan in place, depending on what age you create your plan, you might still be young enough to look into long-term care insurance, but
When is it too late to get long-term care insurance, or does that
it
depend on the
depends
person?
partly on kind of your health, your kind of life expectancy, how long you expect to live. But I would say probably late 50s to early 60s. At a certain point, the cost of the long-term care just goes up so significantly, because you do still have some people who don't end up ever using it, right?
Right.
Um, it's for those people, and unfortunately, none of us know ahead of time which we're going to be. Are we going to be the
Right.
one who dies suddenly, or are we going to be the one who's sick for 10 long years and requires hospitalization for 5 of them? But at least looking at it, having a plan and having well, if this should happen, then we can do this,
Hmm.
can make all the difference.
What are some of the top mistakes, or on the flip side, what are some of the best opportunities that women can take to protect their own financial future?
I think as far as mistakes, we talked a little bit about just sort of putting your head in the sand, right? And
Yeah.
not looking at it. Definitely being aware, getting started is definitely the right beginning. Being aware of and really acknowledging your um, life expectancy, the fact that you're going to have to plan for yourself so much longer, being aware of that and being very conscious around it really helps. because for women, as we said, longevity is kind of the biggest difference between us and those men. So, we're going to live 5 to 7 years on average longer. We're not going to have that spouse typically there to help care for us at the end. That and what we see is that healthcare costs are rising at considerably higher than inflation rates, right? So even though you might have Social Security, which is going to give you that cost of living allowance every year, but healthcare is increasing at such a higher rate than the rate of inflation, which is all you're going to get through Social Security increases. So definitely, that and considering the fact that in our later years, there are just increased healthcare costs. So
Right.
be sure that you look at that and that you plan for that. In our financial plans, we allow for both what we call elder care, which is
Hmm.
typically in the last 5 years of life, you see a significant increase in the needs medically. And then in the last, depending on, men and women are a little bit different, but allowing for several years of that long-term care expense. But to your point and to your question, I think there are also certain opportunities, right? I think women are very relationship driven and values based, and they're not looking to accumulate wealth just for the sake of getting money. So taking advantage of looking at it as an opportunity for what it provides, right? That it will bring them freedom, that it will bring them security, and bring them more independence than not having done so. If nothing else, it helps us from the time that you start, you're much more conscious about the spending choices that you make, right?
Hmm.
How
Hmm.
that will impact your plan. We always begin with looking at people's values and then ensuring that whatever financial goals you have, are those actually consistent with what you say is important to you? Because oftentimes they're not, right? We're chasing the things that the Joneses say we're supposed to want, or
Hmm.
whatever we think
Right.
we're supposed to want. And so really aligning whatever we're pursuing with our true values. And then those also help with those day-to-day spending decisions. You're sitting on Amazon and you're about to buy something. You really need that, And so it's just kind of a good check. But it's not about denying ourselves. It's really about taking back that control, right? Because then we're no longer buying out of impulse.
Hmm.
If it's still a yes, if it's yes, I really want this, it's going to provide me da da da, which is very important to me,
Hmm.
then it's a very informed and conscious choice that you can actually feel good about. Women do approach money much more holistically, want
Mm.
their investments to really reflect their whole life. So I find that once they become engaged in the process, that they do make much more thoughtful and intentional decisions. They might come from sort of a different place than men. Once they really get into the process, I think they become sort of incredibly successful planners once they have the right approach and information.
Right. If you've been a mom, or a wife, or a bit like you've learned how to create a plan and execute it on lots and lots of different things. And, to your point, just like working with somebody that can help you figure out what that plan is, then
Mhm.
you feel like you're in control.
Yes,
Whereas if you just kind of close your eyes and think, oh my God, I hope it's fine. We're all worried about our aging parents, right? Like
right.
I mean, we're worried. We want them to live the life that they want. We want them to be healthy. And like it helps me sleep better knowing that they have a plan.
Right. Absolutely. Well, and like I said, you might have some people who, when you try to work long-term care into their situation, maybe they truly can't afford it. Well, then it
Hmm.
becomes, well, what are we going to do? And
Right.
those are the opportunities where you might need to sit down with your kids and you might need
Yeah.
to have a conversation of, mom may need to live with one of you later in life. And so then it's really getting planning around that, because if they just keep it to themselves, then it's this worry that's going to forever be in the back of, both of their minds, but most especially hers. But if they sit down with the kids and they have that conversation and, somebody says, hey, mom, absolutely come with us. We have room, we have time. Then that piece settles in again, right?
Right.
Then there's the plan, there's that confidence, there's that peace in mind, and you just know what the plan is. And again, those come down to, if you're not having those conversations about what do you want, how do you want it to be, and can we help you make that happen, then it might not be able to play out that way if they never openly have those conversations with the kids.
Yeah, one of my earlier guests, Sarah McCarthy, she's a palliative care social worker, but one of the things that she talked about was defining what are your values for living well, and what are your values for living well with a typically a physical or some kind of a medical challenge. And I feel
Mhm.
like we're kind of having that same conversation here where it's like, what are your values for living well financially? It's
Yeah,
that other part of that stool. And I think like we just sometimes haven't been trained to think of it that way.
right,
Yeah.
right. People might think they need more for retirement than they do because, they have this vision of all the things they want to do in retirement. But oftentimes, it's maybe the first 10 to 15 years where you're very, very active and maybe going to do a lot of traveling and things like that. But as you do age and as your body does, get weaker, at a certain point, you're probably not going to be taking
Hmm.
these big trips to Europe and, the things that were a big part of your budget in the early years, are not always going to be the same impact towards your later years.
Well, Cherie, I loved having you. I loved being able to like honestly ask you a bunch of questions, have you give me very direct answers. And I mean, I learned so much. And of course, there's more questions that come up when you learn more about something. But now I kind of feel like I know where to start. So I really appreciate that. Thanks for spending time with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been my pleasure.
Who Gets the China is written and hosted by Kirsten Mao, produced by Aaron Bryce of Blue Ogden Productions. Our theme music is composed by Greg Fellman of Wind Sand Productions. Our cover art is by Jen Beam of Gigawatt Studio. For more stories and expert advice, follow along on Substack or at www.whogetsthechina.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might appreciate the conversation. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.